You are on an expedition in Antarctica. Now, yes, I know it's very difficult to be able to go on these expeditions. You need permission, you need a whole bunch of documents and appropriate forms and documentation if you actually want to do it and go the formal way or the official way, as they call it. However, you end up going to certain parts that are permissible to be explored in Antarctica, right? And you are with a handful of friends, co-hikers, whatever you want to name it, right? Next thing you know, you're traveling, and all of a sudden you get lost because your compass has some very weird anomalistic occurrence that happens to it, which is that it stops working, right? You've heard about this before, and you knew that you were going to assume the risks before, as well as your friends, before even going on this trip. Your friends and you get lost. You then end up finding a dead body with a handful of what seems to be water bottles surrounding it. And then, just a little bit farther from that dead body, is a staircase, just a mysterious staircase, just in the middle of nowhere, just like the stairs you have in your house, except literally just imagine if someone took it and put it right in the middle of the snow, really. You and your friends, after many minutes of debate, because of how thirsty you are, decide to drink some of that water. You guys, because you got lost, you did not anticipate that you would need this much water because you didn't anticipate you would get lost in this type of way. Your friends drink the water, what seems to be water, you drink the water, all is fine and dandy, you end up finding your way back and what have you. And then you go back to your home country and you start writing about your expedition, the things you saw. You didn't see anything extravagant. You think you maybe saw a couple of UFOs, but you can't prove it, and you definitely weren't recording at the time because, again, you didn't know when to expect them. Next thing you know, you go on Google Earth just to check and see, okay, hold on, where did we go exactly? And all of a sudden, those staircases that you saw while you were drinking the water when you were there, all of a sudden appear on Google Earth. However, you call up your friends and you say to your friends, hey, do you see this on Google Earth as well? And they say, no, what the hell are you talking about? But you know for a fact that you see it. Okay, now, here's the thing, folks. The elites of the world are not upset that we are figuring these types of things out. They are upset that mass consciousness is shifting. They didn't care 20, 30 years ago if we were to expose things as the way they were, as long as mass consciousness didn't awaken to it. But that is the big difference here. Now, today's title is called The SHOC, Harvesting the Ice Wall's Pseudo-MAGNETISM for Tribunal Dissidents, in brackets, the 8th Sphere. Now, you might be saying, Dave, what the heck does that even mean? All of this will come full circle, I promise you, folks. However, before I do that, I want to give a very special shout out to my friend Griff. And again, he's Michael Griff, who is one of, I would dare to say lately, one of the greatest gentlemen when it comes to sending video footage of black goo, sending footage of, magnetism within the black goo and things like this. I'd also like to very quickly give a shout out to our friend Asian World. Please check him out on Instagram. He has phenomenal content and we do work together every so often. And finally, we do have a Patreon. It does help support the show. Head to patreon.com/Generation Z podcast to see what we have to offer. Anyways, let's jump right into it. So first off, let's take a look at this right here, wikipedia.org. This is called GUT, or Grand Unified Theory. A Grand Unified Theory is a model in particle physics in which at high energies, the three-gauge interactions of the standard model comprising the electromagnetic weak and strong forces are merged into a single force. Although this unified force has not been directly observed, the many GUT models theorize its existence. If unification of these three interactions is possible, it raises the possibility that there was grand unification epoch in the very early universe in which these three fundamental interactions were not yet distinct, end quote. Now, we can continue on if we look at Wikipedia here about all of the experiments that in theory actually happened, so it can't be classified as pseudoscientific, but the main point is this, folks. What is happening here, relative to the example I gave at the beginning, is that this GUT theory, this grand unified theory, in an energetic form is actually being applied to those that experience awakening anomalies. Awakening anomalies would be an example I gave at the beginning. Someone has really awoken to certain energetic and esoteric blue beam apparatuses, such as what I said in the beginning at first, where you can see the staircases on Google Earth, but others cannot. This is extremely advanced holographic manifestation, and distraction. Now, let's take a look at this right over here. Pseudo-magnetic, not comparable physics that interacts with an electric field in a similar fashion to a magnetic quotations. This is from Wiktionary.org, pseudo-magnetic, right? And a lot of people might be saying, Dave, why are you bringing that up? Well, according to scientists on a public level, this is again within the public domain, the Antarctic ice shelves are melting, sometimes they're not, but they are emitting pseudo-magnetic frequencies. Now again, notice how they have to use the word pseudo. Again, meaning that it's theoretical. It's probably possible, but again, you know, all of the inconveniences of going to Antarctica and all those blockages and tough, you know, obstacles you have to get around from a legal standpoint. There's no point. Don't worry about it. We'll just leave it up to the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers who fund, you know, the reputable, I say with air quotes, scientists to do it, right? How convenient. Anyways, let's take a look at this right over here. Nature.com, dissipation of tidal energy by Antarctic ice shelves. Now you might be saying, Dave, this is tidal energy. Yes, we can actually find through the dissemination, and I guess you could say the domino effect of frequencies within the tidal waves, that the ice wall within Antarctica is in fact emitting certain frequencies that uses ionized air pockets, as we spoke about in the previous episode, to allow for there to be pocket dimensions at a scale grander than we ever even thought. Now, here's the thing. You might be saying, Dave, what type of frequencies does this ice wall emit? Are you speaking of one big ice wall or multiple ice walls? Well, it depends on how you look at it. Now, in the upcoming members Patreon episode, we will be analyzing some footage, which I previewed on my Instagram story, of a gentleman who allegedly got past one of the ice wall points. Here's the thing, though. I'm not here to say whether it's fact or not as to whether there's one big ice wall, very similar to that of Game of Thrones or something like this, would be a great example in usage of predictive programming, by the way. However, what I am saying is that the frequencies they emit are disseminating in a domino effect to allow for what's called, if we take a look here, eighth sphere tribunals to occur. Now you might be saying, Dave, what is the eighth sphere? Well, I appreciate you asking that. Let's take a look here at Saturn3lightflyers.com. Not exactly a mainstream media website. True Ascension, eighth sphere, crystalline grid, soul origins, and spiritual frauds. All right. As we can see in the picture above, the original crystalline grid was created by the new children or new beings approximately in the 1990s. Actually, they began to build it before that time, however, completed in the early 90s. These high vibrational new beings made this crystalline grid so they could communicate with one another. As we know, most of the new beings felt and continue to feel very alone, isolated, and unsupported in this reality. All right, end quote. The reason this is brought up, folks, actually, if we take a look here, additionally, because high vibrational new beings created this crystalline grid, it matched their energy signatures. Thus, it is a place for them to rejuvenate, be nurtured, and supported, end quote. There's a very strong theory that people, for example, with autism, people with Down syndrome, such instances like this, very unfortunate ones, are actually ascended at an energetic level and cannot conform or grasp energetically to the dimension that we are currently in. Now, the next thing you might be saying is, Dave, what does SHOC mean? Well, I appreciate you folks for asking that. SHOC stands for Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. Now, SHOC is the main classified secret base. You can check the dark web, DuckDuckGo, Google. Very, very difficult to find any of this. This is only confirmed by former NATO military intelligence officers and whistleblowers. SHOC is the headquarters that utilizes a cosmic top secret clearance that is perpendicular, okay, in longitude and latitude to some of the dissemination of wave frequencies coming from this alleged Antarctic ice wall. Folks, I kid you not, we can't deny what's right in front of us. Now, let's take a look at this right over here, because this is extremely significant to what we're looking at now. This right over here, thesun.co.uk, Stairway to Heaven, mysterious giant staircase spotted in the frozen wastes of Antarctica. Unusual sighting on Google Earth sparks wild speculation about alien bases, Nazi underground cities, and ancient human civilizations, end quote. Why do I bring this up? Again, you might be saying, Dave, the example you gave at the beginning, I thought only a few people could see the staircases. More and more people are being able to see it now, folks. The concept of diminished reality, the manifestation of the extremely advanced holograms are not exactly working anymore, because again, the elites that are controlled by a certain, I guess you could say, element of extraterrestrials. It's not for me to say whether this is good or bad. We can argue the suppression they're putting on us is for better or worse. It's hard to say. However, what's happening here is that because free will cannot be broken, it can only be bent. The full extent in which these extraterrestrials, and I guess we could argue negatively oriented elites, are going to is to the fullest extent. But again, free will cannot be broken, so the perception must change. And if we are a big laboratory or experiment on this planet, it may show these species that we are the masses are finally waking up. Anyways, let's take a look at this right here to further, okay, the SHOC claims by ex-military intelligence officers. Shape.nato.internet or INT. The alleged shape assessment of UFOs in 1964, what the official records show. The first such request came in 1991. The request was made by a retired four-star officer who had once occupied a very high NATO position. So I took the request quite seriously. I therefore searched through all of SHAPE's historical records, including our classified microfilm reels full of documents from the 60s, for the document itself or any trace that such a document had ever existed. Anyways, let's take a look at this over here. And I asked the intelligence division to check through its old records. All of these searches turned up no trace of the document allegedly seen by Mr. Dean, and no indications that any study of UFOs had ever been undertaken. I therefore replied that I could find no record that such a document had ever existed, end quote. Now, we can go on and on. We'll do a quick little, preview and scroll to show the underground military bases, UFO bases, this assessment document that no longer exists. Again, it's very similar to the Admiral Wilson and the Admiral Wilson memo document. Again, in that transcript, alleged transcript, he claimed that he would deny ever meeting this particular journalist. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say, right? However, let's take a look at this right over here. Haaretz.com, paradigm shift in human evolution. Early humans left Africa via Arabia. The first multidisciplinary study of prehistoric Arabia finds a hominin presence going back almost 500,000 years, but not at all times, end quote. Why am I bringing this up? Folks, I'm bringing this up because when we take a look at the study that was found within this particular paradigm shift that was being focused on how early humans left Africa via Arabia, what we're going to find is that the electromagnetic frequencies that these ancient civilizations followed along their path, very similar to, maybe the worst example I'd ever give, but it's the only one I could think of at the moment, is the three wise men when they followed that star, which again was allegedly an energetic craft or some type of anomaly and wasn't actually obviously a star. Again, depends on how much we want to say extraterrestrials have been involved in human evolution. Anyways, if we remember Mr. Bob Lazar, okay, and he described in the late 90s how the Delta Omicron configurations work with regards to how these these alien craft are able to access the ether within all of this. What we're going to find is that these ancient civilizations, their trail left a path perpendicular to that of some of the ancient glass that had radiation being emitted off of it. In addition to, not only that, the same curvature of the electromagnetic poles relative to the Earth, and members will know what I'm talking about if you watch the early release of the Let's Get Banned episode. And ironically enough, the same shape that these UFOs and alien craft allegedly make when they go into Delta Omicron configuration. I'll be putting up some of those pictures right now for you folks to see. Sort of that heart-shaped field. I hate to use the word field because we could argue the field is what we're living in right now, the energy field, whereas what these craft activate are in essence, its true form of energy in this dimension. Now, take a look at this right here. I want to cover this very quickly. Ladbible.com. Alien enthusiast who mysteriously disappeared turned up 5 months later. Student Bruno Borges, 25, vanished from his home in Brazil while reportedly working on a secret project. His room was found to be locked. When his family got inside, they found it had been cleared of all its furniture and plastered with pages and pages of code. It also now housed a $2,000 statue, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, here's the thing. He then reappeared later on. However, and I quote, "The police were informed an investigation was launched by Brazil's Criminal Investigation Department, which said all possibilities were being considered." Okay? And then it says here, and the story gets even weirder when 5 months later, Bruno rocks up and says he had to isolate himself as part of his project, which aims to awaken a sick society. End quote. Okay. I'm not debating whether or not this gentleman was a fraud. That's not for me to say. The point I'm trying to say here is this. Do you see how it says that Brazil's Criminal Investigation Department had to consider all possibilities of some type of paranormal event, interdimensional event, or an extraterrestrial abduction? Why do I bring that up? Excuse me. I bring that up very simply because this might sound a little crazy, but the elites from the highest levels of the power and hierarchical structure are being told by the extraterrestrials above them. I'm not trying to put all the ETs in one big bucket. We're going to say allegedly by the Regalions, the ones that are attempting to currently suppress disclosure because they want this lab experiment to continue on, if you will. They are ordering all major countries that are aware of extraterrestrial existence, which is basically all of them at this point, again, relative to NATO. So how coincidental that this has to do with NATO to begin with, right? To basically consider and tell all local police departments in their public statements to consider all possible options when investigating these anomalies. Why? Because if these police departments continue to say, we're ruling out paranormal, alien, that's a bunch of nonsense like they would even 10 years ago, that confines mass consciousness to want to be awakened even more. People will then, for example, this boy's family will then go and say, wait, the police are ruling out this type of investigation of a paranormal or extraterrestrial event? We're going to make a big fuss about it. And this is what the elites don't want because they cannot control that fuss. Again, you can bend free will. You can't break it, right? Now, here's the next thing I want to cover as well, too. This is according to thebaycitybeacon.com. Presidio's new Tunnel Tops Park will connect Ancient Springs to San Francisco Bay, November 18th, 2019. The $118 million park project. Again, folks, those on Patreon, the 118 number, keep that in mind. Notice 1.8, 118. We're going to see there's different number sequences that I've also found, too, that I'll be letting you guys know about shortly as well. Opening in late spring of 2020 is part of a wetlands restoration movement across the Bay Area that will benefit all species, including us, facing the uncertain future of climate change, end quote. Now, this article was published November 2019, before COVID hit, before any of that, but do you see the dissemination of predictive programming that is slowly making its way to the public front? Now, let's take a look at this right over here. WeAreTheMighty.com. These Air Force rods from God could hit the force with a force of a nuclear weapon. This is interesting. The 107 country outer space treaty signed in 1967, again, interestingly enough, this was shortly after, we could say, NATO and SHOC discovered the main species coming and going. Again, Antarctic Treaty was signed a handful of years prior. Then all of a sudden this treaty, interesting, right? The timing of it all. Now let's take a look. What they didn't count on was the U.S. Air Force's most simple weapon ever, a tungsten rod that could hit a city with the explosive power of an intercontinental ballistic missile, end quote. Why am I bringing this up? I'll tell you why. This rod of God, or rod from God if you want to call it, I would dare to argue, I could be wrong, but I would dare to argue is being used to inject Antarctica's ice wall with these frequencies to disseminate through the tidal waves that are being detected in a minute using basic electromagnetic frequency readers. And how do we know this? Well, let's take a look at this right here. newcenter.lbl.gov. This is from Berkeley Laboratory. Again, Berkeley. We can argue that these are some of the people that are arguably controlling the academia of STEM and suppressing knowledge at the highest level. Anyways, as Lou Elizondo may have suggested with regards to certain rogue and institutional elements being a part of Majestic 12 these days, although there are more than 12 members now. But anyways, graphene under strain creates gigantic pseudo-magnetic fields. Again, notice the word pseudo. The direction, it's not because they want to say, if we catch them later on, say, no, we said pseudo because it's theoretical, right? Pseudoscientific, pseudo-magnetic. That's why, like I said at the beginning of this episode, we looked at the definition of pseudo-magnetism because of this. Graphene, and I quote, the extraordinary form of carbon that consists of a single layer of carbon atoms has produced another in a long list of experimental surprises. In the July 30th, 2010 issue of the journal Science, a multi-institutional team of researchers headed by Michael Cromie. Now, before I go on, this would have never been permitted to occur if not for those within the Majestic 12 giving the go-ahead of this type of public discovery or revelation, if you will. But let's take a look. A faculty senior scientist in the Material Science Division at the U.S. Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and a professor of physics at the University of California, Berkeley, reports the creation of pseudomagnetic fields far stronger than the strongest magnetic fields ever sustained in a laboratory, just by putting the right kind of strain onto a patch of graphene, end quote. Again, piezoelectricity. Does this not remind you of the reoccurring electromagnetic frequencies, if you want to call it? Now, the next thing you might be saying too is, okay, Dave, what are you talking about, military tribunals and all these types of things, right? What do you mean when you say, for tribunal dissidents and all that? Well, there are certain species, okay, that are actually coming here utilizing human weaponry. And the reason they're using human weaponry and not theirs is because although theirs is extremely advanced, that is actually their weakness. They are disseminating some, not all, some of the direct energy weapons in correspondence with certain third world countries attempting to destabilize the current Regalion species that is aligned with the NATO faction. How do I know that? Let's take a look right here. NationalReview.com. Wait, someone's using energy weapons against Americans near the White House? Interesting, right? Federal agencies are investigating at least 2 possible incidences on U.S. soil, including one near the White House. Okay, and again, end quote, before I go on, this reminds us of Havana Syndrome. Very similar, right? It might not be the Russians or the Chinese after all. However, it could be. I'm not ruling that out. But again, excuse me, let's take a look at this right here. Exopolitics.org. Contact with Nordic alien in United States Air Force uniform whose spacecraft was photographed. You'll see very shortly why I bring this up. Let's take a look at this right here. Okay. On May 24th, and I quote, my anonymous source JP, who has provided dozens of photos of different types of craft belonging to an Air Force secret space program, says he encountered a human-looking Nordic extraterrestrial. He claims the Nordic was wearing a United States Air Force uniform and invited him to go for a ride in a landed saucer-shaped craft in a secluded wooded area of Orlando, Florida. JP declined the offer but took photos of the spacecraft after it departed. His recollection of the conversation with the Nordic reveals that they are directly cooperating with the Air Force and abiding by the terms of an agreement concerning their interaction with the general public. Okay, again, these are not allegedly the species that are suppressing the knowledge of extraterrestrials. The Nordics got in a little bit later with regards to the deals being made because Eisenhower signed the 1954 Greada Treaty a little too soon. Anyways, the conversation began at 10:32 Eastern Daylight Time. JP says, nice contact today. Michael Sala asks what happened. JP goes, I went into the woods. I was hearing a ringing in my ear. I'm thinking it was like a calling, like I got from the last contact. I met up with this man wearing a United States Air Force suit, dark blue. His face was different, possibly a Nordic. Anyways, he invited me to go to the craft. I said no. He asked me again if I was sure. I told him that we're gonna start needing video evidence. He told me that because of a deal they have with the United States and other countries, they can't. End quote. That's the main point I'm trying to make right there, okay? And I say that because, again, not just with the United States, but it depends on how much this Nordic could reveal with NATO, with SHOC, and this may not be a good thing due to the origination of the Greada Treaty. Anyways, take a look at this right here. He told me this kind of ship is going to be seen all over. After he talked to me, he touched me. I had a flash that I was inside the ship floating around. It was a split second, then he told me you're back. All right. JP then goes on to ask about the cooperation between the Nordics and the Air Force. I told him what's going on with you guys in the U.S. Air Force. He told me that they're working on a big project together, a couple of projects in the Gulf of Mexico involving a couple of MacDill Air Force personnel. All right. End quote. Now, I'm bringing all this up because it seems like the Nordics are trying to reorient their abilities to be able to negotiate with humans to sort of break free of this sort of trap that the Regalions have us in. Now, I could be totally wrong at the same time. However, the big projects seem to line up, based on my evidence and research, directly with that of what seem to be referred to as dissidents. Dissidents are referred to within NASA's secret archives as those that have strayed away from a deal humans have made with them, certain extraterrestrial species, or, as a matter of fact, certain species that didn't even make a deal with them whatsoever. How do I know this? Let's take a look at this right here. Exopolitics.org. A Russian prime minister not joking. Extraterrestrials live among us, according to the Men in Black documentary. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is President Medvedev, who is now prime minister of Russia, not president, but he was president when Putin became prime minister because he could not serve more than 2 terms in a row before Putin slowly changed the laws and the constitution. Anyways, take a look at this right here. After completing an on-air interview with 5 television reporters on December 7, 2012, Prime Minister Medvedev continued to respond to reporters and made some off-air comments without realizing that the microphone was still on. He was then asked by one reporter if the president is handed secret files on aliens when he receives the briefcase needed to activate Russia's nuclear arsenal. Along with the briefcase with nuclear codes, the president of the country is given a special top-secret folder. This folder is in its entirety, contains information about aliens who visited our planet. Along with this, you are given a report of the absolutely secret special service that exercises control over aliens on the territory of our country. More detailed information on this topic you can get from a well-known movie called Men in Black. I will not tell you how many of them are among us because it may cause mass panic. End quote. Now, here's the shitty part, I guess, if you want to call it. Take a look at this right here. Medvedev was translated as follows in a Reuters report. Reuters being the Western version of the mainstream media representative in this particular meeting with the Russian prime minister at the time. And Reuters quoted him as saying this: more detailed information on this topic you can get from a well-known movie called Men in Black, end quote. Reuters obfuscated that translation. They didn't lie, but they obfuscated it to then say in their article, oh, the president was just joking. The prime minister was just joking off air. You see how they just slip it in like that? So again, this is exactly how they do it. This is every single time the way in which these apparatuses happen. There's a coincidence here, right? Well, coincidence I say with air quotes. Take a look at this. thesun.co.uk. Icy Atlantis? New satellite images reveal mysterious dome structure hidden in Antarctica, fueling SHOC claims an ancient civilization once lived there. A strange building has appeared on the icy continent which is claimed to be home to a hidden ancient city. End quote. Now, the reason I bring all this up, folks, is because if we take a look at this right here, Beyond the Soul's Meridian.org, the Ascension, CERN, and Echoes of the Eighth Sphere. Okay? It is suspicious why there are so many within the Ascension community hailing the Earth's rapid transformation as a positive experience. Many are referring to this as an upgrade in our genetic codes, but at what price? Is it possible that the transformational energy that many are intuiting is being artificially enhanced or manipulated? End quote. It's a very good point, and I say this because, again, all of a sudden, we can now see things on Google Earth. We can now see things in person that allegedly are small apparatuses of Project Bluebeam we thought were totally fake, relative to the example I gave at the very beginning of this episode. Interestingly enough, however, again, notice how everyone says, I can see it. I can see it too. What you're saying, Dave, you saw it 3 years ago, but we didn't. Bullshit. That's exactly how it works. The form of Bluebeam's technology and holographic manifestations and Bluebeam realities, I say realities with air quotes, are diminishing. Think of it as if the recent film Spider-Man Far From Home, when Mysterio uses all of those drones, those holographic drones. And when people say, Dave, is Bluebeam coming? Bluebeam's right in front of us all over the place, folks, in my humble opinion. So what we're seeing here is that, again, we feel like we're seeing these things. Again, going back to this article on the sun.co.uk, these things are coming up more and more from Google Earth. We're seeing it. We're starting to notice things that they cannot hide from us, because now we're noticing they're trying to bend free will, but they can't break it, right? But you see, again, this website raises a great point. At what cost? How do we know this ascension is good or not? We got to see and play right down the middle. With that being said, folks, thank you so very much for watching, and we'll catch all of you very, very soon. Cheers.